Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining the Water Hub this afternoon. I think it's afternoon for all time zones at this point, for mastering the basics, refresher on media interviews. And so, yeah, as Bridget put in the chat, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, and we will do the same and introduce the Water Hub names, pronouns, location, and if there's anything in particular that you're looking forward to learning today. And we can probably start by introducing ourselves. So this is our whole Water Hub team. The Water Hub is a pro bono communications organization. I see a lot of familiar names in our attendees today, so it's great to meet you if we haven't met before, and it's great to see you again if we're already acquainted. The Water Hub predominantly works on Western water issues, as well as some national work across the country supporting water justice advocates and experts, community organizers to make their communications more effective. My name's Sarah. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Strategic Communications with the Water Hub, which basically means I just do a little bit of everything. And I'm based in Denver, Colorado, the land of the Cheyenne, Ute, and Arapaho people. And I have been with the Water Hub just about 13 months now, so a little bit over a year. We have Sade and Bridget here today supporting us in the chat and doing some live tweeting. And then myself and Jessica will be presenting today. So let me hand it over to you, Jessica.
Hey everyone, nice to see you all, or welcome back if you're a returning friend. My name is Jessica Jewell. I use she, her pronouns as well, and I'm based here in Los Angeles on Tongva territory, and I am the digital director at the Water Hub, doing a little bit of everything also, and working with Sarah and our colleagues to support a lot of frontline organizations and folks such as yourselves. So thank you for joining us today.
Great. So a little bit about our agenda. So today we're going to cover the elements of a compelling message and what goes into making a good soundbite, particularly for those radio and TV interviews. And then we'll spend the bulk of the time talking about the basics of interviews, and like any good story, we'll have a beginning, middle, and end. So we'll cover this in the structure of what to do before an interview, during, and after, covering a little bit on how to stay on message and deal with tough questions. And then we have planned it, so hopefully we'll have ample time for Q&A and discussion. I know we got some good questions in the registration that we'll try to address during the presentation, but certainly feel free to pop your questions in the chat as we go through, or use the Q&A box. And we are also recording this, so we will be sharing a recording and the slides and all of the resources that we mentioned in a follow-up email that will come early next week. And I like to kick this off before I hand it back over to Jessica with this quote from Arthur Ashe, because interviewing is one of those things that I think can make people really nervous. Some folks love it and like thrive in that environment, and I personally can't relate to that feeling, but more power to you. But confidence and coming across with self-assurance in an interview is really clutch. And honestly, that's a skill that you can learn and develop through practice and preparation. And that's why we're here.
Hey y'all, so I'll start by kicking us off with the how to develop powerful messages. And today we're going to be using the structure from the opportunity agenda that we love, that follows the formula of setting your messages up as follows, with a value, problem, solution, and taking action. So using this outline will help you develop strong messaging to paint a picture for your audience. And today we're going to be using this in the context of lead pipe replacement in the wake of the recent passage of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the coming Senate vote on the Build Back Better Act, and what this all could mean for communities and families. So first, let's talk values and really the vision of your work and your audiences as well to help ground your messaging. You can start by asking yourself questions like, how would I describe the world I want to live in? Or what are some values that guide my work? So think about how you want to target your audience to act or how you want them to change their minds, and always think back to values. And in the case of folks that are impacted by lead exposure, it could be that they center health, community, and safety to kind of keep in mind as you go forward with your messaging exercise. So for next, I should say, is talking about what the problem is and how we can explain the challenges communities are facing and how to clearly inspire action. So we'll cover that now. And as we all know, likely that lead is a huge issue in the United States. So let's walk through that in terms of messaging. So first, we want to frame the challenges about how does the problem threaten our shared values that we had started with in the beginning. It's important to keep your messaging focused, to communicate your story clearly and concisely, and to do that, usually just pick one or two supporting pieces of evidence, like a statistic or a personal story that can back up your case. Here, we're shining a light on how, for example, on the statistics side, 6 to 10 million families still drink water from lead pipes in the US. And on an anecdotal piece, you could share, for example, how an individual family has been affected by lead. For example, has an individual family had their child have developmental issues, or is there a story of a community member who's now experiencing health challenges due to unsafe drinking water? Using a stat or a story helps paint that picture for your audience and communicate the problem very clearly. Next, let's talk solutions. Whoops, didn't mean to breeze through that, but it's a good segue to say that. The solution, there's a target. I like to refer back to the target as a piñata, or a decision maker that can make your desired change happen. I first heard this metaphor on a training as a target being a piñata from Reframe. If you haven't checked them out, they're incredible. They work around inspiring narrative change across different spaces and how to build narrative power to win campaigns. So think about who your target is, who's that piñata, and how this could fix the solution you've identified earlier to motivate your audience to act. So when you're developing solutions messaging, think hard about that. It will help shape what you're trying to communicate and get as specific as you can about who those decision makers are and how they can get you closer to your visions or values of the world. You might do this with your campaigning team, or if you're a campaigner, around power mapping, but essentially once you identify and get really clear about who that is, then you can start thinking about messaging. Focusing on doom and gloom doesn't always inspire action. Make sure to always tap back into the values, and that's the anchor of your messaging work. And how can this solution support that and get to the world that you all want to live in? And lastly, get super clear on what the path forward looks like. How will you be able to crystallize that vision for your future through this solution, and what steps need to be taken to get there? Here's an example in the context of lead pipes. It's actually from an advisory board member of the Water Hub, Shri. He's the water policy specialist, with Environmental Policy Innovation Center. Here, he does a great job communicating what solutions could look like for lead pipe replacement and what we need to do to go even further. I found this on Twitter a few days ago and it really struck me, and I thought this would be great to share. So in the wake of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, like his tweet says, it's been approved. Awesome. Now 15 states can replace all their lead pipes. And if the Build Back Better Act passes the Senate, we could have 9 more states replace theirs and 14 others could do at least half, which is a great vision to inspire folks to take action. It helps inspire all of our imaginations and how our values could be embodied by doing this. So again, framing the solution really clearly. Next, let's chat around action. So that takes us here. What is it that you want your target audience to move the needle? we want to give them a really clear action step, like, is it to sign a petition? Is it to send an email to a target? Is it to make a phone call? Depending on your organizing strategy, just this will help also your messaging. So in the context of the scenario we're playing with today, your call to action could be to ask your audience to contact their senators to vote yes on the Build Back Better Act to get lead out of people's drinking water around the country. So that takes us to sound bites. To recap, messages have an outline, including a value, problem, solution, and action. A soundbite is not the same as a message, but it's a valuable starting point. A message is your work in a nutshell. It's just enough information to help people understand the issue and connect it to their lives. A soundbite is just enough to pique their interest to learn more. And before I move forward, I just want to flag that please feel free to keep your questions coming through in the Q&A. Bridget will be fielding any of them, and we'll get to them as soon as we can and are happy to work through anything. So I know I'm talking a lot, so feel free to raise a hand or let us know if you have any questions. So let's talk about why. Why do we want to use sound bites? Well, we live in a short attention span world. I think all of us can relate to that with the barrage of notifications and messages and media that's saturating our lives. And while us as cause communicators may spend a lot of time sometimes getting focused on newspapers, or perhaps there's program staff or leadership at your organization that really wants to see that story or an op-ed, most people are still getting their news from social scrolling on their phones or broadcast TV. Something that is a really important piece of information to keep in mind is that the average length of a local TV story is just 41 seconds. And that includes the setup. So if you really think about this, when you're going into an interview, you quite seriously have seconds to deliver a really clear message. So, and then again, thinking about the context of social, a lot of folks are just seeing a headline. Not all of them are clicking through to the story, or they might see like a quote shared on Instagram in a graphic. So make sure that you can kind of think about when you're delivering sound bites, that they're bite-sized and can be used in different formats and contexts that are super short lengths. So let's chat about what makes a good soundbite. Firstly, they're visual. We want to help people see what we're trying to communicate clearly in their minds and inspire their imagination and make that emotional connection. They are packing a punch. You want to leave a lasting impression with people, and speaking from the heart and getting to the heart is a great way to make sure that those sound bites stick in people's minds and are easy to recall with other folks in their lives. They tap back into our values. You'll see a trend here about being values driven in our messaging and soundbite creation. So in the context of lead pipes, like we were saying, they're valuing perhaps health, safety, community. So keeping that in mind as you're crafting your sound bites. And lastly, sound bites need to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. Like I said, if you're on broadcast, if it's a social media quote that just gets pulled by somebody and you see it circulating, they need to not have more and more context in order for them to have impact. Here's an example of a good soundbite. It's a quote from Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha from Flint, Michigan. And in Bloomberg Law, she says, "We know that for centuries that lead is a poison. Yet across our country, lead is the straw through which we're getting our drinking water." Let's go through how this captures what we just covered in the last slide. You can picture it, right? You can see what a drinking straw is, and to think about it as a lead pipe is really unsettling and really paints a picture of how that is the experience of folks around the country. Words like poison hit us hard. It packs an emotional punch. It stays with you. And this is really strong because it can stand alone without any other context, and it'll linger with folks. Next, I'll hand it back over to Sarah about the interview.
Great. I do see a question about this recording. Yes, we will share the slides and the recording early next week with everyone. So you should have everything at your fingertips. And I see Bridget put in the chat. We actually had done a whole training on sound bites a few months ago. And so that'll be in the email as well. And here's the link if you want to visit for the first time or revisit or share a little bit of a deeper dive into sound bites specifically. So next we're going to get into the interview itself. And I'm going to take the before section and give you the least surprising tip of all time, which is before an interview, you should prepare and practice. Shocking tip. We spend a lot of time, especially at the beginning of campaigns when we're developing them, actually sitting down and thinking through what are the core messages that we want to share, going through the exercises and the worksheets that Jessica just talked about. And so before doing interviews, that's a really good time to revisit those documents and actually write down everything that you want to get across in an interview and practice it. It can also help to write out your Q&A to anticipate the questions that might come up and the kinds of responses that you want to give. We are going to cover a little bit later in this presentation, staying on message and dealing with tough questions, but you can also prep easy questions too. Like basically before any interview, they're going to ask you like, why am I talking to you today? And what do I need to know? And you could probably guess just based on your experience, a couple of the sort of easy ones that come up over and over again, and you want to make sure you're really prepared for those. Additionally, as Jessica mentioned, you want to identify an anecdote and or a statistic that backs up your point. So if I am out there talking about lead service lines, I live in Denver, Colorado, and so I might want to talk about how 60 to 80,000 households in Denver Water's districts, Denver Water Service Area, are served through lead service lines. But a personal story is that I live in one of those homes. And so, I filter all my water through the Brita filter that Denver Water sends to me because I am worried about that lead service line. And I'm glad that they're going to get to fix it eventually, and really happy about the program that they have. But that's a story about how that issue is impacting me personally. And that's something that you might want to prepare, either an anecdote about the work that you're doing, members or supporters or community members that you're working with, as well as the sort of factual basis. One thing to note, and I think Jessica said this already, is just pick one statistic that really backs up your point. I think we've all experienced this when someone is like telling you a bajillion facts and figures. It can be really hard to internalize those, to remember what someone said, but one really powerful statistic can hang in the air, hang in our heads. And by combining facts with emotional punch and messaging, we're both getting heads nodding and hearts pumping. Now on to the practice. Practice speaking slowly. That's something that I have to work on every day. Practice answering those tough questions and even the basic stuff that you think you know by heart. The more your message rolls off your tongue, the more natural it sounds and the less filler words you'll actually use when you're doing the interview itself. You can do this by yourself in the mirror with your colleagues. Feel free to call the Water Hub. We're happy to do some one-on-one coaching or practice. And another technique is to record yourself, either having someone record you, even just on their phone or via Zoom. This is an incredibly painful experience. I don't know if anyone has done it before, where you have practiced an interview and watched a recording of yourself talk. I find it unbearable, but it is an incredibly helpful exercise because you can see the tone of your voice, some verbal tics, or your body language and what that shows. And it can really teach you a lot about how you're presenting yourself and how your message is coming across, and things that you might want to either lean into or tweak. Another thing before we move on that I'll say is you don't have to wait until an interview to practice. We are always talking about our work. And I think this stuff is really helpful, even outside the context of media. We are sharing our campaigns and our missions and what we're working on with our friends and family, with our donors and our community supporters, with with our partners, with the public. And those are all opportunities just to continue to hone our message and speaking skills. Next up, I'm going to talk a little bit about the logistics of the before. So I know we have both kind of subject matter experts, program staff, and communications folks on the call. So I think these tips will be helpful to all of you. Aside from the basics, of course, of the when, where, and how, you also want to know a few things about an interview before it happens. The first is, who is the interviewer? If you are talking to a grizzled beat reporter he knows the ins and outs, he or she knows the ins and outs of an issue before they have been, they've been covering this issue longer than you've been alive, versus talking to a general assignment reporter who might need a more basic introduction, you might come to that interview a little bit differently. What is the audience of this outlet? And also just reminding yourself of who your ultimate target is with your campaign. Are you trying to reach a politician who's a decision maker? Are you trying to reach community members to get them to take action? Or are you trying to reach a utility to influence how they do business? That's all going to affect how you might tailor your message in each instance. Another thing you might want to ask is, who else is the reporter talking to? Now, they don't have to tell you the answer, but it does not hurt to find out, because this can give you so much insight into the angle of the story to help you prepare. If they're talking to, the quote unquote opposition on something, you'll know that you need to prep for that argument. And it can also give you the opportunity to suggest other sources that they should talk to, friends and allies, to round out their story. One of the questions that came up in the registration was dealing specifically with incoming requests from reporters. So I want to make sure that we touch on that as well. And I'm going to give you a 3-step plan for what to do. So the first thing to do when you get an incoming, whether it's a call or an email from a reporter who is writing a story and wants you or your organization to comment, is to gather intel. What is the story? What do they want to talk about? Who else are they talking to? What's the meat of what they're trying to get at? And most importantly, what is their deadline? This will give you a sense of whether or not you even have time to respond, and how much time you have to prepare to get back to them. You might already have a media protocol at your organization, but it's pretty good to have a plan in place for this ahead of time. Do you know who inquiries should go through? Should you be forwarding them through a communication staff, or do you want issue experts to be going directly to reporters? It really differs widely by the preferences of you and your organization. But it can be good to have a plan to know who is prepped and available to speak on what issue, so that if anyone gets an inquiry, they know who to send that to. Lastly, I just want to say, you don't have to respond to every request. I used to be like in-house communications, and I felt great pressure to respond to everything. It's like, you don't want to let any opportunity slip through your fingertips. But at the end of the day, not everything is going to be strategic to your organization or helpful for your campaign, and you might just not have time, and that is okay. So once you know more about the story, how quickly you need to respond, you can really decide if you have the capacity and if it meets your strategic goals. If a story isn't going to be helpful to you in your work, or you don't have bandwidth, it's okay to pass, and you can really still use this as an opportunity to build a relationship with the journalist. Refer them. And I'm going to admit, I used to think that if I said no, reporters would hate me and never want to come back to me or talk to me again. And I have found that not to be true, which is great. We are all human beings. So, use it as a way to refer them to friends and allies who might be a better fit for a story, or who have a little bit more capacity. You can also let them know about what issues, topics you do want to talk about in the future. And I will also make a plug here. If you get interviewed a lot and you're often the first call, you have a lot of soft power in this space. And I really encourage you to also pass the mic when you can, to give more folks the spotlight and be able to talk about these issues. Oh, I have one more slide. Okay, lastly, you're always on the record. So when you are talking to a reporter, again, I in my notes, I said most reporters are people too, but what I meant to say was all reporters, people are people. So there's obviously a certain amount of like small talk, relationship building that you're doing. All of that is great, but you just want to remember that you're always on the record when you're talking to a reporter, unless you have both agreed that you're off the record. This is not something I think that comes up a ton in our work because we are generally like trying to get ourselves and our issues out in the news. And I think it's more of an issue for like the wheeling and dealing politicians. But I think it's really just important to remember because sometimes we do, and we are friends with people who are journalists, and they are great. But it's good to remember when we're talking about work, we're always on the record. Sometimes reporters will also reach out to you via email, and everything you write in an email is also on the record. So one tip that I have is responding to reporter questions via email. This is a great opportunity to write out your response exactly how you would want it to be lifted into a news story. Sometimes it can be really easy to sort of respond quickly, more conversationally, less exactly on message in an email because you're just going back and forth. But sometimes that's what ends up and ultimately in a story. And so I think that's one reminder that I have for myself and others is to be able to like really think through your response and sharing those kind of full sentences that you want to deliver even via email.
So that's me as we move into how to manage ourselves once you're in the interview. Sarah started to tease some of this out, but let's start with that it's okay to take a breath and consider what you want to say before saying anything. There really isn't any rush to go into what your talking points are. I know that there's a sense of urgency and it can cause some jitters, myself included, but it's all right. Take your time to collect yourself. If you need a minute, a good way to, good hack is saying something like, that's a great question. Or another example of like, let me think about how I want to respond without getting too technical. And you can get, they understand, especially, with program staff and researchers or scientists that, it's a good opportunity for them to kind of walk themselves back before getting into the weeds and make sure that you're staying on message and your sound bites are nice and tight. Next is make sure to speak in complete sentences. As I said in the soundbite section, if you're, being interviewed for broadcast or even thinking about the context of social, you have seconds. Usually your clip is going to be super short and people are not going to see the question piece that the interviewer is prompting you with. They're just going to see what your answer is. So for example, if I'm asked, where do you live? I should say, instead of saying Koreatown, I would say, I live in Koreatown, better than just giving people kind of things out of context that can feel disjointed or may not even be used. Another thing, good tip, is while it can be super awkward, is that silence is okay. Do not be afraid of it. Reporters, their tip is, on their own side, is they will often let a pause hang in the air before they move on to their next question because they want to see if you're going to say anything else. So stick to your clear, concise answers. Don't feel like you have to fill a void because you may end up rambling and going off message. So relatable. I definitely do that myself. It's something I'm working on all the time. It's okay to just stop talking and just pause. They'll move on. They'll ask their follow-up question. It gives you an opportunity to keep the conversation really focused, but it takes practice and intention and just being really present with what you're saying. Next, if you're flustered, again, completely normal. You can stop and start over. It's totally okay to say, I'm tripping over myself, or I misspoke. Can I say that again? It's better to stop yourself, start over, and get a clear sentence out. And it's better for the reporter too, because it will make their job a lot easier when they're trying to lift a quote for their story, or when they're putting together the broadcast piece and need a clip. Just really clear delivery is good for everybody. It's a win-win. Lastly, it's okay to say that you don't know. We are not omniscient creatures. It's okay if you don't know everything off the top of your head. If you don't, just write it down and get back to the reporter, either with an answer. Say they ask you a question that's a colleague's area of expertise and you want to make sure that you're getting it right. Or like Sarah had said, you can pass the mic. Maybe there's another partner organization or ally that you feel would do a better job in delivering what this reporter needs. It's a great way to build relationships and show reciprocity in your community, of your coalitions and all of that. So spread the love. It's okay if you don't know, and everyone benefits from it. You'll have more credibility also from the reporter by giving accurate information and knowing that they can come to you as a source who will connect them when they need to, and that you are not someone who's going to spit out something that in the fact-checking process they have to walk back. It will definitely impact your relationship and a repeat on conversation in the future. Next, we're going to be moving on, staying on message. Sarah?
Great. And I think we had planned to have like a full 15-20 for discussion and questions, and I think we are on time, which was great. So never fear, we will be talking at you, stop talking at you all momentarily. We spend so much time preparing our messages, practicing our interviews, and honestly, staying on message during an interview is a skill unto itself. When a reporter asks you a question that is likely to take you off message, or move you into a less helpful frame, or tee up an opposition argument, you want to stay true to your message without sounding like a weirdo robot who doesn't know how to answer questions. I am really curious in the chat if folks have been tripped up by any of these or had these come up in their work with the media. I definitely, encourage folks to put any real life examples of kind of these tough questions in the chat. The one I'm going to use in our example here is about the kind of like question that will never die about like the economy versus the environment. But if anyone has any other ones that come up, please put them in the chat. And I see there was a question from Denise. I think we'll get to that one first in the Q&A. Okay. So I hope you all will share those in the chat. The first thing is we talk about repeating our main message a lot. Repeat. It feels really awkward to do in real life, but it is really important if you have a key message or a soundbite to get that in your interview a couple of times. This is because you're only going to have a couple of seconds on a TV news story or one quote in the paper, and you want to make sure as much as you can that the quote that they pick is the one that you want them to pick. Again, that can feel kind of awkward, but with practice, it gets a little bit easier. An interviewer will often ask you the same question, slightly rephrased a couple of times. This is kind of a similar trick to the like letting silence hang in the air. It's just a way to like get the subject to talk a little bit more. When I'm doing interviews, this is something that I do because I just like want to hear what people have to say. And oftentimes they have really interesting things to say. But I just want folks to be aware of this technique. Sometimes reporters, they're just trying to get a good quote. They just want to hear what you have to say, but sometimes they have kind of a narrative that they are writing in their head and they want to get a quote that fits into that story. And so by asking the same question over and over again in like a different way to try and get a different response, that can be one of the reasons why. And unless you're doing like a live interview, which we can certainly talk about that as well, you're only going to have a short snippet of the conversation included. So that repetition is pretty important. One thing I'll also flag is that at the start and the end of an interview, reporters will often ask pretty open-ended questions about, why are we talking today? Or at the end of an interview, ask something like, is there anything else I should know? These are prime opportunities to hammer back home your takeaway. What I really want people to know about this story is the key point, the key message, the point of us being here is, and really just repeating your main message. And I can't count the number of times, and I actually just heard this from a partner that we are working with, that they tried really hard. They repeated their message over and over again. And at the end, the reporter asked, like, what's your takeaway from all this? And they said, one more time, what I really want people to take away from this interview is, and their main message. And the reporter was like, oh, that was really well said. And that's what they used in the story. And so it's just like one of those things that is really good to be like aware of and prepare for ahead of time. Now, sometimes you get asked tough questions, and we can anticipate these, and we actually have a formula that we use: acknowledge, bridge, pivot, to get back on message so you can deliver your message without sounding like one of those phony politicians who doesn't know how to answer a question. I think we've all probably watched like debates or TV interviews where the politicians get asked a question, and instead of answering any question, they just like turn to the camera and they deliver their talking point, and it comes across like real phony. I think the good news here is that, like, unlike politicians, like, we typically have, we're talking from conviction and passion. And so we're usually don't need to be too evasive. But it's really important to know how to pivot from a question that isn't in the frame that you want to be in, to still stay on message, but not lose credibility with your audience, and to sound like you're being super evasive. So that's what we'll cover here today. So the first step in this is acknowledging the question. This is, again, to help you like be able to kind of gently turn back to the message that you want to deliver without sounding like you didn't hear or respond to the question. And one thing that I want to say about acknowledging the question is this doesn't mean that you have to repeat the premise of the question in your answer. When you're, as we've talked about before, when you're being interviewed, the interviewer side of the story is very rarely in the final product. If you're doing a sit-down interview for TV or something, then it will be. But oftentimes it's just your quote or just your clip that's playing. And so the audience doesn't know what question you were asked. And so you don't need to give, particularly if it's a question about kind of an oppositional frame or argument, you don't need to give that any more airtime. So if we use the example of like, I think in one of the future slides, we talk about like, won't shutting down this factory kill jobs, or won't this environmental protection hurt the economy? That's one that comes up kind of a lot in various forms. You don't need to add in your acknowledgement of the question, like, oh, some people say that protecting the environment is going to hurt the economy, because that's just giving more airtime to that frame. So instead, you can either be kind of evasive, saying like, oh, that's a point of view, but you can also be, if you want to be a little spicier and kind of tackle that head on, you can say something like, that's an industry talking point, before we move to the next section, which is pivoting and or bridging before you get back to your message. So on our next slide, the bridge or the pivot is that transitional phrase that gets you from your question back to your main message in a natural way. Practicing these kind of pivots will help you come across as really confident in your conversation and just make them sound really natural. So this is one thing that I do recommend practicing, because otherwise it can feel a little bit awkward. But these are some of the pivots that we think tend to be pretty helpful. Things like, what I want to make sure people take away from this is, the important thing to know is, what we're hearing from our community is. And these are phrases that you can use to get you back onto your main message from those questions. And then lastly, you want to deliver your message again. So in this slide, we put it all together using the example of, won't shutting down this factory kill jobs? So instead of saying in your answer, oh yeah, there might be jobs that get lost, you can start by saying, that's an industry talking point. What we hear from the community is they are most concerned about getting sick from pollution. That's why polluters need to be held accountable for dumping toxic chemicals. We can create economic opportunity for our neighbors by investing in green space and clean energy. So that is an example of how to stay on message when you're asked tough questions. One other thing I wanted to note is the format of an interview will definitely impact how you prepare and how the interview goes. For TV interviews or basically anything on camera, we actually have a whole training for that as well called How to Look Good on Camera. So I think we'll make sure that that gets into the follow-up. And I think Bridget can probably pop that in the chat here as well. And that goes over everything from lighting to whether you're in person, or a lot of us are honestly doing on-camera interviews on Zoom these days. And so encourage folks to check that out as well. On radio and podcasts, and actually, now that I think about it, Zoom TV interviews, one thing that can be really important is to make sure you have a clear connection. If you have the capability to like hardwire into Ethernet, into the internet, rather than be on Wi-Fi, that can just ensure a more stable connection. If you're doing a radio interview, I don't think anyone's ever made a plug for landlines before, but landlines actually tend to have a better clearer connection than cell phones. But if you're on your cell phone, making sure that you're in an area where you have good service so that you come across clear and crisp. Having like a decent microphone. I think we cover that in the actually How to Look Good on Camera as well. Don't have to cost a lot, but can add a lot to the quality of the audio that you're giving if you're talking on podcasts or doing radio interviews, or even again, TV interviews that you're doing via Zoom. That can add a lot to your presence and just making sure that you're able to come across really, really clearly. For podcasts, which, I can't tell you how much new information, new people, interesting things I learn from listening to podcasts every day. These are great resource outside of like traditional media to do interviews. And one thing that I just want to flag about these is it's going to be a different vibe than if you're doing a TV interview or even a radio interview, where you're trying to get your soundbite in, where you're trying to make sure you're repeating your main message because it's going to be cut. Oftentimes podcast interviews are, depending on the podcast, but oftentimes they're a little bit less produced, kind of longer form conversations, more casual, more real. And so that provides you an opportunity to have just like you and I are talking about an issue rather than you're kind of like at the podium giving your speech. And so that's something that you might want to practice as well with colleagues, just how you have those kind of more in-depth conversations. And that's a place where you might still want to get a good zinger in there here and there and practice those, but really those have less of an emphasis on the soundbite than, oh, I see. Yeah. Okay. So we have one more slide and then we'll get to our Q&A.
I was muted, my bad. So I'll keep this short just because there's some really great questions in the Q&A. I want to give enough space for that. But the after, you did everything, now what? So the interview went well or it didn't, we can talk about both. And once it's over, just make sure that you follow up and thank the reporter for the interview to build that relationship and goodwill. And follow up on anything that you said you would do as next steps, whether that's to share a report that you cited or connect them to your colleague who knows a certain issue area that can speak better to that. Or maybe there's an outside source like a partner or like I mentioned earlier that you want to connect them with. So follow up with contact info, any additional materials, anything you promised, make sure that you follow up promptly with the thank you. And lastly, once the story is out, make sure to ask for the link in advance if you can. Sometimes they'll send it in advance, but just keep your eye open for once things go live, because it's another opportunity as a touch point for the journalist and to develop rapport with the outlet to share on social. So making sure that tag the reporter, tag the outlet, get the word out, and show that you appreciated that time and to amplify their reporting and your time together. So with that, I would love to move into the Q&A. We have some time and there were some really good questions that came up. Why don't we start with Allie's? She asks, what steps can we take if someone botches an interview, for example, what kind of next steps could she take, or somebody who needs some help of damage control, let's say?
Do you want to take this, Jess, or do you want me to start?
Yeah, take it off. Take it away.
That's a great question. I think there's a couple of things that you can do. And in some ways, it's like you try your best and it's sort of like go with God and, but if you feel like you stated a fact incorrectly or just were, kind of got off message or something, you can, I would like, if you are noticing that in the interview, I think one of Jessica's tips from earlier is if you're able to like stop yourself to even say like, you know what, I'm really sorry. I just like, I'm tripping over myself here a little bit. And what I'd like to do is like pause, step back and start again. That's totally something you can do. If the thing is said and done, or you are, if you're working with a colleague who is having a little bit trouble with an interview, I think the thing you can do in that follow-up piece we just touched on is, particularly if there's a factual error, follow up with the correct thing. People get stuff wrong. It happens. It's not the end of the world, but being able to follow up and say, hey, I just want to let you know, we actually got something wrong and we want to make sure that we are being as accurate as possible. If you want to talk again, we can definitely do that, but here's the information and here's what we would like to say. At some point, it's kind of like out of your hands, but that's something I think you can do. And I really do think journalists, like they want to find the truth. They're not like, for the most part, especially because like, it's not, no offense to all of us here, but it's not like we're like public figures that it's like fun to trip up. I think for the most part, people really want to get the truth and the heart of things. And so we'll be open to that. Another thing you can do is, sometimes something comes across wrong in an article that wasn't your fault. And you can follow up and ask for a correction. I've had this happen where I was working for an organization and they sort of inaccurately and inarticulately described the program or got a fact wrong. And I followed up and said, hey, just so you know, this isn't exactly right. And here's the correct answer. And we would really appreciate it if you could do a correction and correct it in the article. And more often than not, you're able to do that. I hope that helped.
Yeah, feel free to tag on any follow-up to that one. Another question that came through is if you're inclined to respond with something like, that's an industry talking point, how do you find the balance between calling that out without offending a reporter who might be asking that genuine question? And I would just go back to that. It's okay to redirect them to what your message is, and you can do that tactfully and still, name that there might be some, there is opposition. That's something okay to name. Conflict is part of storytelling, and just, tactfully, again, the importance of writing things down in advance and how to prep for, curveballs is maybe that's how you kind of can prep ahead of what are some tactful ways that you could help redirect the question. And if you are respectful and it shouldn't offend a reporter, in theory, they're supposed to be unbiased. We know that's not always true. But just you can still reinforce the message and get the attention back on your issue without being offensive. But it is an opportunity to change minds and redirect things the direction you want to go.
One thing I'd add to that too is like tone. I think tone matters a lot here too. Because if you're, and I think the setting as well. Like if you're doing a TV interview, you might want to come across, it depends on what your ultimate goal is, but if you want to come across a little more direct, a little more forward, that's something you feel comfortable like delivering straight into a camera, go for it. If bombast is your style, it's going to help you win, go for it. If it's not, you don't have to force it. It's okay. We all have different styles. And, if you're talking particularly, I would say to a print person or someone who's not recording and ask something about that, the tone matters a lot here, saying like, I just think that's an industry talking point is like different than being like, that's coming from the opposition. It's fake. Those are different ways to convey the same thing. So I think one thing I'll just add there is like your tone and your relationship with the journalist probably will impact impact that as well.
Thank you for adding that color. Very good points to add to that. Could we talk a little bit more about how to talk to reporters anonymously-ish on background and that kind of nebulous space, Sarah?
Yeah, that's a great question, Denise. I saw that one earlier and definitely want to make sure we got to it. So there is a nebulous place in between off the record and on the record called on background. And again, I think for most of the work that like advocacy organizations are doing, a lot of times we just want to be on the record, and that's it is an easier and more simple place to be. It's very black and white. On background, what that means is you're talking to a reporter, giving them more information, but they're not looking to quote you in a story. So maybe you just want to educate them on an issue, or you don't want your organization or yourself to be quoted, but you want them to know about something that's going on to pursue it. If you've ever seen quotes, this particularly happens with like blind quotes from like government officials, where you see a source close to the matter said, that is on background. That's someone who is giving an interview on background. They're kind of giving the behind the scenes, but they don't want their name in the story. And my main tip for this is just to be really clear, because similarly to off the record, these protocols for how a reporter is treating your interview, it only like the main etiquette around it is it's only good if you've both agreed. And so I think it's a really good idea to just really clarify what you're interested in the interaction, how they are taking the interaction, and make sure that you both agree. So for example, if there's something that the opposition is doing that you know about, that you really want someone to look into, but you have close information from it, but you don't want your organization like in a story, or like a, maybe it's like a more like a friendly-ish government agency, but they're just like not doing the right thing on something, and you don't really want your organization's name in it, but you want a story about it. That's an opportunity where you can talk on background and say, I don't want to, I'm not talking to you as a representative for my organization. I just want to talk to you on background because I think there's a great story here that you should pursue, but only do that if the reporter also agrees to it. And just be really clear, and just communication here is key.
Right. You want to protect your sources, and you could also say something really clear with the agreement that this is not for attribution. Like they could use the information in the story publicly, but be super clear that they may not cite you as a specific individual. So perhaps they could say something like, staff from X organization, just very clear, not for attribution, but they could possibly use the content, is another piece of info. But again, like Sarah said, it has to be both agreed on both sides. You can't just go under the assumption that because you said it's on background and they never said, yes, I agree that it will be. So again, the importance of building trust in that, in your reporter relationships.
Cool. Next up, we have tips for getting buy-in on media protocols from your organization. Great plug here for comms teams. That's a really good question. I have been at organizations where we had really strong protocols that everybody followed and really enjoyed. And I've been at places where there was a lot of folks going their own way. And it could feel, I'm assuming this question is coming from a communications staff person who is trying to wrangle some people, but I might be reading into it a little too much. In any event, I really think that having guidelines is really clear. It's really helpful. Just helps people like know what to do. If you can demonstrate how this is going to like strategically help the organization accomplish its goals, you've got a plan. I'm assuming you have media goals and a media plan for the year about how you're going to increase coverage on an issue or get brand awareness. And having, having a step to know who to go to for what is just going to make it more clear. It's going to allow you to respond to more requests. And there's actually, we can see, and if you, I'm going to send the follow-up email, so you'll have my email too if you wanted to get in touch, because I'm sure I can drum up like a template of what this could look like as well. And I'm sure there's like a ton of resources on the internet too. But if you can show kind of what a simple plan looks like, a lot of these come from like crisis communications where you want to have just very clear, like knowing who's approved to do what and why. Hopefully that, I think it just takes time to show that it can be really effective, and it just eases stress for everybody.
Thank you, Sarah. I want to flag that we are almost at time and that we do have some folks that are hanging on, and we don't have a hard stop, at least on my side, and I believe my colleagues as well. So if folks have more questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to them. Erin asks, if we have any advice on answering the question about why biodiversity matters, that she's been tripped up on this before. I think if you refer back to the message developing framework of doing that homework ahead of time of what are the values, what is the problem, what is the solution, how do you want folks to take action? And I think really distilling that so that you have a really clear roadmap of what you want to say, keeping it very clear, using a statistic, an anecdote, and developing a set of sound bites ahead of time, that should help guide you in how to answer your questions and your issue area. And I know that some of the topics that we work in are super nuanced and wonky, which is why it's even more important to put that time in to try to have some really solid, airtight answers. And it might even help your program staff too, like guide their work and your priorities. Let me know if that makes sense or if you have any other questions, but I would just refer back to these tools as much as you can.
Yeah, one other thing I'll add is well, we talk a lot about like focusing on and you said the why in your story, the why over the how, and focusing on the outcomes. So having biodiversity leads to having, that's how we get medicine. That's how, there's like all these things that are positive that come from having healthy biodiversity, which I'm not naming off the top of my head because I don't know what they are all the time and so I think talking about those outcomes and talking about the why specifically can be really helpful, and connecting that, as Jessica said, to our values.